of our allies that we offered fucking material support to, and you go, what about aliens though? But Jimmy Carter and aliens, like, shut the fuck up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Carter is dead at the age of 100. Jimmy Carter died. Now, obviously, I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I will continue talking about this today as well, because there's a lot of fresh eyes on this, new people who are unfamiliar. Now, the first question on everyone's mind probably is, oh my God, how could he have died so young? Right? The second question on everyone's minds is probably, was he vaccinated? Or did the CIA get to him, you know? Because obviously, when you're so young and virile and clearly, you know, have at least another 20 to 30 years ahead of you, when you have so much life to live still, it is kind of shocking, if not alarming, when someone in their prime dies like this. It's probably a vaccine death. Some people have said maybe Mossad because of his opinions on Israel. You know, I don't know. I don't know what ended up happening. I will not be making an assertion. That New York Times 30 timestamp is to remember there's some TOS. Yeah, no, I see that. I understand that. What was the public perception of Jimmy Carter? Good, right? Fuck no. Jimmy Carter's public perception now is like relatively positive because of all of the amazing things that he did after his presidency. But when he left office, he was one of the most historically unpopular presidents. He was literally, I mean, people despised him. Republicans basically, first of all, he led to Ronald Reagan. Okay, Ronald Reagan, the Satan, putting up LeBron numbers all around the country. And also on top of that, every American had like this, like they considered him to be a squishy lib. They hated him. There was so much resentment against him. And we'll talk about why. But yeah, Trump's lines at his rally was literally, Biden is the worst president since Carter. Republicans have kept up this like anger and resentment and hatred that towards Jimmy Carter's presidency has been whitewashed due to the incredible humanitarian that he was. Dude was so bad that he turned my Democrat grandfather into a fascist adjacent Trump supporter. There's a literal line that can be drawn from Carter admin the 9/11. That's why I always say Jimmy Carter did 9/11. I say that as well. Jimmy Carter's administration is almost as responsible for 9/11 as the Reagan administration was. Almost as responsible for 9/11 as it was the inception. A lot of people think Operation Cyclone is where the Mujahideen started getting armed and trained openly by the CIA and the American government. It actually didn't start with Ronald Reagan. It started with Jimmy Carter. That's what a lot of people don't know. Jimmy Carter's own National Security Council, Zbigniew Brzezinski, very famously in an interview to a French magazine, openly admitted that they were radicalizing militants, some of which became the Taliban, as you guys know, some of which became Al-Qaeda, radicalizing militants, arming them, in an effort to force the hand of the USSR to invade Afghanistan and turn Afghanistan into, in his words, the USSR's own version of Vietnam. Carter also kick-started the shift towards neoliberalism, both from the Democratic Party. Obviously, Ronald Reagan supercharged it and made it permanent, but Carter was the original inception point. Now, we'll talk about that sort of stuff in a brief moment, but before we get to that, so on the domestic front, he did a bunch of anti-union shit, and then Ronald Reagan basically overtook that and dominated that field entirely. So Carter, I think, is seen as like a shitty president across the board by many Americans, but for bad reasons, when he should be seen as a shitty president because all presidents are shitty, even though in his post-presidential life, he did a whole bit of good, okay? He worked on foreign policy. He has Carter Institute is one of the very few unique center-left foreign policy think tanks out there, I would say, okay? Like, it's shocking. Carter also wrote books about Israel being an apartheid state and very actively talked about how Israel is an apartheid state. So that there is a lot of stuff that he did when he was president that was dog shit as you're sitting on that throne. And then a good deal of good that he did in his personal life. So I think he's a unique figure in that regard because you can be a good person overall, truly a good person, but also simultaneously be like a evil guy when you are the president. It's virtually impossible for you not to be evil for the most part when you are the president of America leading the empire. So, you know, it's an interesting figure for that reason. That's why I didn't play the crab rave meme for Jimmy Carter when he died. Normally I would. He is one of the few presidents, I think, that definitely tried to atone for his sins, I would say, even though, you know, you can't do that. All right. But let's hear how the media covers him, and then we'll continue to talk about it.
The parade has started. He's out of the car.
This was not planned. It was not scheduled. By golly, Bob, how about that?
It was nearly 50 years ago that the newly elected Jimmy Carter broke with convention and walked to the White House, signaling a new era of openness after the painful Watergate scandal that...
Yeah, this is also funny. Like, he came in after Nixon, okay? This is the lowest point in the eyes of many Americans for the Republican Party, where you got Richard Nixon doing like insane competence, incredible incompetence, and people hated it. Like people hated by the end of the Gerald Ford tenure and pardon. Americans were like, "Fuck the Republican Party," okay, and so he was not able to capitalize on the moment.
Toppled Richard Nixon.
I'm a Southerner, and I'm proud of a heritage that shows concern for the working men and women.
The born-again peanut farmer from Georgia was a political outsider whose folksy charm paid dividends at the ballot box.
Governor Carter from Georgia, running for president. I want to ask you to help me next year.
First as governor of his home state, and then winning the Democratic nomination for president in 1976.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
Everybody knows you're gay now.
Once he got to Washington, though, his outsider status played against him. Unable to persuade...
Yeah, he's a Navy officer, only fucking American president to actually have a submarine certification, took over his family's peanut farm, ran for governor of Georgia, Southern country bumpkin, unique at the time, especially for like the Democrats, I would say. I mean, I guess like since then as well, he's a good old Southern boy, right? What's up, you big black money? I like that you had to correct yourself. You were like, no, I didn't mean money. I meant you're a big black monkey. That's cool, man. Old school racism. Weird, really weird behavior. Peanut farm owner sounds like a joke job. It's not. First Southerners is 1837. I like that he corrected himself. He didn't want me to misunderstand that he was being racist. So thank you for correcting yourself, just so we understand.
A bare-knuckle Congress to approve his plans for consumer protection, labor reform and healthcare. Instead, it was the international stage that provided him the platform for his greatest political achievement. In September 1978, Jimmy Carter invited the leaders of Israel and Egypt to his...
This is always so funny because the way they fucking glaze Jimmy Carter for his foreign policy accomplishments is hilarious, because like even from the domestic attitude at the time, obviously the Iran hostage crisis is like part of the reason why he is despised. Like that's one of the major reasons why he's despised. Obviously the economy is a significant factor here, inflation, but also like this wasn't necessarily all that good of a deal for at least the Palestinians. And also there's a shit ton that the Carter administration did in terms of advancing American empire and its interests, in terms of accelerating and destabilizing areas during the Cold War. Like he continued all that. It's not like he was a dove. I think his post-presidential work is significantly more dovish than what he did when he was in charge.
His presidential retreat at Camp David. It was an extraordinary 13 days.
I'm gonna leave for now. Maybe I'm a lib, but given the context of the 70s, Jimmy Carter's presidency is grossly misinterpreted. Also, tired of the Afghan Mujahideen and 9/11 pipeline talking point. It rids the Afghans of all agency and legitimate gripes they have with the USSR and Afghanistan. The USSR were backing a government for the there for the funsies, just like they didn't back Bashar Assad for the funsies, etc. Anyways, it is what it is. I think it's pretty funny that I don't know if you're like a Jimmy Carter fan and that's why you're saying this, but it's wild. Like, it's wild to use CIA adjacent talking points in 2024. That's wild, chatter. As you know, and I have covered this extensively, the Afghan government at the time was ruthless to a lot of the Muslim villagers. Okay? That's true. I never said that that's not true. Having said that, the CIA actively utilized the real resentment that some people had and radicalized people, only giving further credence to this already militant government to continue using this as an opportunity to just fucking murk as many people as possible, saying, well, we got to deal with these guys. They're fucking crazy. You're talking about the Soviet-backed Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, just for context, right? Some chatters may be confused. Yes. And it's not like the Afghan government was also favored by the USSR either. They were like, dude, you're going crazy. Dial it back to the own fucking USSR aligned government. But it's crazy to say that this involvement was like America's involvement, which has been openly talked about at this point in 2024, makes it seem as though like it's insignificant, inconsequential. Did Lola leave already? There was a near collision at LAX. Wait, what? This is par for the course in virtually every story of American involvement. American involvement doesn't just happen out of nowhere. There is always a righteous cause that they align themselves with. It's how much credence you give to that narrative. If you ever turn around and say, no, the overwhelming majority of people wanted this, yeah, no, you're serving the purpose of the State Department at that point. It's very frustrating. We all did the homework and listened to Blowback Season 4 last year. Good. I'm re-listening to Blowback Season 3 right now. It's such a banger on Korea. It's so fucking good. All right.
Days that followed, President Carter used perseverance, negotiation, and sheer will to forge an agreement no one before had imagined possible, let alone achieved, a peace deal between the Arabs and Israel.
To these two friends of mine, the words of Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God.
But at home, with an economy in the doldrums, he couldn't find peace with the American people.
Gasoline shortages are spreading across the country. Closed gas stations are becoming increasingly common.
Spiraling oil prices brought petrol shortages across the country. But his decision to point the finger at voters would cost him dear, as they, in turn, asked why their president was blaming them and their consumer culture for the nation's woe.
I forget who I read this. I think it might have been Noah Colwyn who posted about this, but apparently Yasser Arafat tried to warn Carter about, we all know at this point that Ronald Reagan manufactured the hostage crisis or extended it to benefit his chances, right? To like, to basically ridicule the Democratic Party, to basically ridicule Carter, make him look like a fucking squishy lib who wasn't up to the task of saving the lives of these Americans that were trapped, right, in the Iranian hostage crisis. It was literal treason. So it's kind of funny when it's not the first time this happened, okay? It's not the first time. Trump is not the first time this has happened either. Trump is just basically doing the old school method that Republicans have done, that Henry Kissinger also did. Nixon did it too. So it's not like a new concept at all. Republicans have done this forever, okay? And the Democrats keep going, I don't know how this could have happened. Like, what? It's the third time. Trump did it as the third time, okay? Like, cutting a side deal with a foreign adversary or a foreign ally in an effort to harm the electoral chances of the existing Democratic Party's administration is a old trick that the Republican Party has done now 3 fucking times. And it's at least somewhat instructive for you to understand, especially if you watched it happen. You watched the Democratic Party not do a single damn thing against this, against Trump, openly just like, yep, I'm talking to Netanyahu. I'm going to ceasefire when I'm president. What did the Democrats do? They just fucking threw their hands up and went, oh, I don't know. We're not even in dealing with this. So just so you understand, like, it was the same exact incompetence even back then, maybe even supercharged.
Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption.
But the ultimate blow for his presidency came from an event that haunts America still.
The U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been invaded and occupied by Iranian students. The Americans inside have been taken prisoner.
After President Carter decided to allow the ousted Shah of Iran to the U.S. for medical treatment, militant students of the Islamic Revolution stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. The crisis then compounded when Jimmy Carter ordered a rescue mission that ended in disaster, a crash in the desert that left 8 U.S. commandos dead. Carter persevered, eventually brokering a deal with Iran to release the hostages, but by then it was too late. Voters had turned against Jimmy Carter for his perceived weakness, and Ronald Reagan, a Republican, was elected in a landslide victory.
Is there any word about the hostages? Have they taken off? Any word from the hostages?
I could have destroyed Tehran with one military strike, but had I done so, I don't have any doubt that every hostage would have been assassinated. So I had to be patient for 14 months, I think, with the appearance in some people's minds of weakness, but eventually my prayers were answered and every hostage came home free and safe.
It was Carter's work post-presidency, though, from building homes for the poor to his advocacy of human rights, that undoubtedly has earned him the highest accolades.
Any problem at all?
Do you think the media was the main cause of everyone's turn against Carter? No, because, like, I mean, the media definitely played a role in this. The media has always played a role in this. But I think it was all his own personal incompetence. It's like saying, do you think that it's the media's fault that, like, people turned against Joe Biden? No. Like, the media plays a role for sure, but a good leader is to overcome these things, okay? A competent leader is supposed to overcome these things. Now, there's a lot of dark aspects to his legacy as well that no one covers, because that's just like American foreign policy machine operating at the behest of empire and you know, into many different atrocities. Yeah, from South Korea to East Timor, there are plenty of awful things that the Carter administration did, including, like I said, the origination of Operation Cyclone. So we'll get to all of that. We'll get to all of that, but just understand that, you know, he did a whole bunch of bad shit and overall was relatively incompetent. He definitely did a lot of good stuff after his presidency. That much is clear, okay? Fuck Jimmy Carter and his administration supported the Afghan Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan war, with Pakistan's establishment deeply involved. While it countered Soviet influence, it also gave rise to militant groups like Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Pakistan has lost around 90,000 lives fighting terrorism stemming from this policy, leaving the nation burdened with decades of instability and violence. What is this? Kurt Cobain on Jimmy Carter? What's good? Alex is leaving. Dude, what do you want me to do? I'm working right now. Here, I'll give you a hug. Bye, chat. All right. Bye. And just like that, the Alexander Lull overruled reign is over. He's done. He can't hurt you any longer. Kiss him on the lips? Yeah, okay. Ian Grimm's summary of Carter was on point. Carter was a terrible president and a wonderful ex-president. I'd prefer the other way around, but RIP. It's true. That's a great way to summarize it. That is a great way to summarize this.
Fantastic. That is a wonderful story.
When Jimmy Carter was interviewed by Channel 4's Jon Snow, he'd been out of office only 4 years, but had begun...
Is the Russo-Ukraine war the first time post-World War II that American military support is morally justifiable? Of course, this is the wake of the Obama's fumble of Crimea seizure and separatist agitation. No, the only reason why it's considered morally justifiable is because of Russia's overarching violent and completely unjustifiable military action. Any matter of foreign conflict could be solved through diplomacy, and many other parties have tried to solve this through diplomacy, and Russia's unwillingness, but also Western agitation and specifically American agitation certainly played a role in this as well. America is morally on the right side. in terms of Ukrainian emancipation, but for the wrong reasons. Oh my God, that shot of the World Trade Center after Carter helped fund the people who take them down to cinema. Oh, Jesus. Wait, let me play this again.
When Jimmy Carter was interviewed by Channel 4's Jon Snow, he'd been out of office only 4 years, but had begun arguably the most productive period of his public life.
So we're building about one house per day for people who don't have homes without interest. The Bible says you shan't charge interest to people who are poor. So we believe in biblical economics.
A deeply religious Christian, reborn this time as social reformer and humanitarian who dedicated himself to helping the disadvantaged. It was that mission, as well as his ongoing efforts to find solutions to international conflicts, that earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002.
Mr. Carter, can we have some questions, please?
But Carter failed to broker a peace deal between the Israelis and Palestinians later that same decade, when he famously visited the town of Ramallah in the West Bank and met with a senior member of Hamas, to the anger of Israel.
But I'm not a negotiator. I'm just trying to understand different opinions and provide communications between people that won't communicate with each other.
He would show that same determination when he was later diagnosed with liver cancer in 2015.
Yeah, there was a lot of healthcare initiatives the Carter Center worked on. There was also a lot of like global diplomacy initiatives that they worked on as well. It's like one of the it's shocking to see that a former president started a think tank that actually was like center left in American foreign policy. That's like unique.
Spread to his brain.
I just thought I had a few weeks left.
Miraculously, he recovered and, despite old age, continued to tirelessly pursue his projects, building homes for the underprivileged, even as his own fragility began to show. Taking a tumble in 2019, he still refused to slow down. But without doubt, one of Carter's most enduring legacies will be the partnership he shared with his beloved wife.
Hamas, I don't think they existed at the time. I don't know what part they were talking about, but yes, Hamas certainly didn't exist at the time. But he did. I'm pretty sure the Carter, the Center monitored the 2007 elections, as they've monitored every Venezuelan election as well.
Rosalind, to whom he was married for 77 years.
So I think they were talking about the extremist terrorists within the PLO. Remember, suspiciously, every group that is tasked with Palestinian emancipation, whether they are negotiating with Israel or not negotiating with Israel, is a terrorist. There's actually a really good Palestine legal convo between Palestine Legal's own Dylan Saba and Brace Belden and Liz Franzak of the True and Odd podcast, where they talk about the terrorism designation and its first application in American history. And it was first utilized, this vague terminology was first applied to the PLO and has consistently been used against every Palestinian liberation organization, Palestinian Liberation Group. So Lolo blocked me on TikTok because I kept calling him out on isolationist talking points. Okay, take a week off and really reconsider why you think I would do anything against that. It's like, yeah, hey, what's up, guys? I'm annoying. They were actually Hamas. It was 2008. Yeah, if they're talking about 2008, then it is Hamas. But if they're talking about when Carter was in charge, then yeah, it's not. Trust me, that Hamas didn't really exist back then. It was basically an Islamic charity. Carter paused aid for the El Salvador military that abducted, raped, and killed 3 U.S. nuns for a brief moment, then continued giving aid. White people said he wrote a book and a house. Yes, chatter, don't worry. We're going to get to that. I'm gearing up for that side, the dark side, the side that isn't often covered.
So important was she to Carter that Rosalind was often invited to cabinet meetings during their years in the White House. And when she passed away in 2023, then 99-year-old Carter attended the memorial service despite
Alta Salty Baba, thank you for the 5-tier and give the subs.
Having been placed in hospice care himself earlier in the year. He was determined to be there.
By the way, okay, there's 2 things I learned that I didn't know about Carter since his passing. Number 1, Yasser Arafat tried to warn Carter that their Republicans were like Reagan was actually trying to get the PLO to open up back channel communications with Iran to sidestep Carter's administration and extend the refugee in an effort to use it as not the refugee crisis, sorry, the hostage crisis, in an effort to use it as a weapon against Carter. And Jimmy Carter literally threw his hands up in the air and said, I don't care. Don't tell me about any of this. That's one thing I learned. And the other thing I heard, and I don't know the veracity of the second one, but the other thing I learned was, and this one is even crazier, apparently Jimmy Carter was not allowed to speak at Obama's inauguration, which is unique. Okay. And the reason for why, hold on, was apparently he wanted to, like, he was at the inauguration, but he was not, was it at the DNC? Oh, this right here. There was less overt tension between Mr. Carter and Mr. Obama, but little warmth either. The former president was annoyed at being left off the program of live speakers at Mr. Obama's nominating convention in 2008, but supported the younger man's efforts to expand healthcare for the indigent at home while criticizing the continued use of drone strikes that target terrorists overseas. This is a long write-up describing how Jimmy Carter's post-presidency work often conflicted with the agenda of the U.S. government, and there isn't a single mention of Palestine, not one. Why didn't Jimmy Carter, according to the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, why didn't Jimmy Carter speak from the podium at the Democratic National Convention? Alan Dershowitz said he had something to do with it. An interview with Shalom TV, the Harvard law professor says he pushed Barack Obama very hard to make that decision. Dershowitz said in an interview with Shalom TV, Barack Obama had to make a choice between his Jewish supporters and his anti-Israel supporters like Jimmy Carter, and he did not choose Jimmy Carter. And that was an embarrassment for Jimmy Carter and a show of disrespect. It was a good decision, a wise decision, a moral decision, Dershowitz added. Now, I'll say this. Alan Dershowitz is a notorious plagiarizer and a fabulist. Therefore, I don't know if he's just kind of planting himself into the story by lying to Shalom TV. Having said that, however, he did have access and was regarded as a person of decent notoriety that was a member of the elites at the time, and therefore he could have easily had Obama's ear. I don't know like I said, this claim I don't know the veracity of, because if the only proof of this is the fact that Jimmy Carter was not allowed to speak at Obama's nominating convention, and the fact that Alan Dershowitz himself said it, okay, I will, it could be fake. It could be him lying to create a story around how much more access and power he actually had, how much more influence he had within the Obama administration. Now, I mean, he is a serial liar, is what I mean. Okay, he's a serial liar, Jeffrey Epstein's bestie. So take this information with a grain of salt, even though it is kind of funny. However, I will say it is unique how much mainstream outlets have erased Jimmy Carter's post-presidential work in terms of the books that he wrote about Israel, for example. I learned this about Carter today. One of the promises you made in 1976 was if you were elected, you would look into reports from Roswell and see if there would be any cover-ups. Oh, my God. Yeah, I came in contact with a woman. Oh, God, stop. It's like the boring part of every fucking palace intrigue story is like alien shit. Some of you guys literally need lobotomies, man. I swear to fucking Christ. Like, I'm over here talking about covert operations that the CIA is actively engaged in terms of destabilizing the entire planet that led to like sometimes millions of people being fucking ruthlessly slaughtered in the hands of our allies that we offered fucking material support to. And you go, what about aliens though? But Jimmy Carter and aliens, like, shut the fuck up. God damn, dude. It's just like, I feel like it's a unique way for all of the conspiratorial minded people to just like shift the attention away from real vectors of pain to like some fucking dumbass shit. God damn, dude. This shit pisses me off so much. Anyway, I really do need to take a fucking day or two off. Holy moly. Just eyes on the prize, man. Eyes on the fucking prize. Jesus Christ. Eyes on what, like, actually, like, you just don't give a fuck about anything. Like, you don't care about anything. You just care about like the the conspiracy theories and the fucking grand narrative of it all. You don't care about like the actual fucking conspiracies that lead to like real people dying, okay? Don't you have spas in LA? No. They do, but
for her till the end, describing Rosalind as my equal partner in everything I ever accomplished. As long as Rosalind was in the world, I always knew somebody loved and supported.
It's a fucking funny clip of a story. Good Lord, man, take a deep breath. No, it's just like I see it. I treat it as like a distraction in these issues. Okay, in these situations where we're talking about like real shit, real tangible harm done to people. People that go back and go like, well, what about this alien story? It's just like fucking lasers my brain. I consider it to be sometimes a deliberate distraction. Maybe not in this case, but it's like very frustrating. And then people always like get mad at me for sidestepping away from the important conversation. It's like it's inconsequential. It's insignificant. Okay. I just don't care. Like, unless aliens are coming down to institute a socialist revolution globally, I don't give a shit, okay?
Me.
It's so wonderful to see both of you. Thank you for talking.
In an interview to mark their 75th wedding anniversary,
Carter
pee. Was asked what he was most proud of, and notably spoke for both of them when he answered.
Well, we're very proud of having been elected and having served as president. That's just, we honored human rights. Those were the things that were important to me.
Mr. President, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what do you want your legacy to be?
When Jimmy Carter was sworn in as the President of the United States in 1977, the nation was still reeling from a period of political upheaval.
I came along at a time when Americans still remembered painfully the lies told and the debacle of Watergate. I was outside Washington. I was not stigmatized by the mistakes that had been made in those previous years.
It's a long way from Plains, Georgia to Washington, D.C.
And I brought a fresh face of a peanut farmer, a working man who swore never to tell a lie or make a misleading statement.
Jimmy Carter from Georgia. I hope to be your next president.
The president and his family surprise and delight everyone by walking the parade route down Pennsylvania Avenue up to the presidential reviewing stand in front of the White House.
But winning the White House at the height of the Cold War carried extraordinary responsibility.
The system is survivable, it's verifiable.
The peanut farmer from Plains suddenly had his finger on the button to start World War III.
It's a horrifying thought. If the Soviets launched a missile attack from Soviet territory, we had 26 minutes before the missile struck New York or Washington or whatever for me to respond. And so I knew that I would have to respond, which may have resulted in a Holocaust. So I went out of my way to understand the problems of Brezhnev. I used to sit by a globe and turn it to Moscow and try to imagine how I looked out on the rest of the world with a formidable military force in NATO and tremendous challenge from China. And what would happen if the Soviets became convinced that they were in danger. Well, I tried to avoid all that, but it was a very, very terrible responsibility.
To give our own and our nation's security.
Carter took pains to keep the peace and to broker a nuclear arms deal. But when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, he rolled out a covert mission to arm Afghan resistance fighters and announced a boycott of the 1980 Olympic Games in
That's interesting. I see why you say he seems like a genuinely empathetic person. No, he's like a real fucking Christian, dude. He is. Like, this is pre-Reagan Operation Cyclone, pre-Operation Cyclone, pre-official It's the start of the brave Mujahideen, okay? Just so you understand. And it's like a lesser known aspect of the Carter administration. It's not often talked about. I mean, foreign policy in general is just like often not talked about at all, right? Unless it's a way to justify why American intervention was a necessity.
In Moscow.
With Soviet invading forces in Afghanistan, neither the American people nor I will support sending an Olympic team to Moscow.
The goal, he says, was to pressure the Soviets to reform.
I wanted to change their system of government, but I also wanted to bring the Soviet Union into the international forum. The Soviet Union, had in effect promised to honor human rights, and they had failed. But over a period of time, I think that may or may not have had an impact on Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yeah, I mean, look, here, we'll cover this a little bit, but when former U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski bragged about prompting the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan so that it could get its Vietnam, he was not making an empty boast. Afghanistan was the ground for one of the last Cold War battles between the United States and the Soviet Union after the Red Army rolled into the country on December 24th, 1979. For the next decade, the Soviet Union became bogged down in a guerrilla war against anti-Soviet Mujahideen. Faced with a rugged mountainous terrain and stiff resistance, the supposedly invincible Red Army was humbled, leading, according to some experts, to the empire's collapse. And it certainly did, okay? The Soviet involvement in Afghanistan absolutely played a formative role in the collapse of the USSR. Okay. And many years after the fact, Brzezinski openly, before 9/11, openly touted his foreign policy bona fides and said that this was a deliberate attempt to radicalize a lot of the otherwise nascent movements of the Mujahideen on the ground in an effort to destabilize the USSR adjacent Afghan government, forcing the USSR's hand into direct involvement, turning Afghanistan into the USSR's own Vietnam. Those were his words. Observers give a number of reasons for the Soviet invasion. Until 1973, Afghanistan was a monarchy led by King Mohammad Zahir Shah before he was overthrown by his cousin Mohammad Daoud, whose party consisted of pro-communist elements. Daoud was overthrown by the Afghan communists. Internal struggles among the communists led to another coup in which Hafizullah Amin took the reins of power. According to experts, the Soviets perceived Amin as a potential Tito. He was in touch with both China and the United States, and the Soviets saw Afghanistan slipping out of its orbit. According to former CIA Director Robert Gates, U.S. intelligence services began aiding the anti-Soviet Union Mujahideen 6 months ahead of the Red Army's invasion. Brzezinski said he convinced Carter to sign the first directive for secret aid to opponents of the pro-Soviet regime in Kabul on July 3rd, 1979, in an effort to goad the Red Army into invading in a 1998 interview. Obviously, we have the hindsight of 2020, but most of the Mujahideen became reactionary Islamist Taliban. But was Carter supposed to just be silent when the Soviet Union committed a genocide? More people died in the Soviet invasion than the U.S. invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan combined? Wait, what? This is before. What are you talking about? About 2/3 of the Afghan population was displaced or killed. No, you're not wrong. It was fucking brutal, but you have to understand that this is before this happened. You understand that, right? Like, this is before the USSR invasion. What are you? I don't understand how you don't get that. I'm talking about the Soviet-Afghan war. There were more internally, externally displaced and killed than both U.S. interventions. Okay, but we're not talking about. I'm confused. Have you already covered this 1800 stuff? Yes. I wrote a note to the president in which I explained to him that, in my opinion, this aid was going to induce a Soviet military intervention, said Brzezinski. The former National Security Advisor's plan was a success. The Afghan quagmire forced the Soviet Union to stay in the Central Asian state for a decade. The initial thrust of the Soviet invasion was made by some 40,000 troops. By late 1985, this number swelled to 118,000, of which 10,000 were reported to be in the Soviet secret police and other special units to try to face down the Afghan resistance. 2 days after the Soviet invasion, Brzezinski sent a memo to the U.S. president expressing concern that if the Soviets succeed in Afghanistan, the age-long dream of Moscow to have direct access to the Indian Ocean will have been fulfilled. Virtually every intervention that happened in the Cold War era, from Afghanistan to Korea, in the post-World War II Cold War era, all the way until the dissolution of the USSR, virtually every single foreign intervention that America conducted was done in incredibly violent ways to directly destabilize these nations and punish them for the crime of having Soviet sympathies. Okay? In many circumstances, the people that were killed in this process, sometimes due to the incompetence of the Soviet-aligned governments, and incompetence born out of the fears of being destabilized, and oftentimes, more frequently than that, the direct violence of the American-aligned puppet states that were beefed up and defended by, sometimes, like in the case of Korea, direct American military action. Okay, has led to countless instances of straightforward, not ethnic cleansing, but at least like ideologically cleansing the population. If you look at places like Indonesia, the numbers are in not even the tens of thousands, not even the hundreds of thousands, but almost 1 million. I think more than 1 million, as a matter of fact. And in Korea, it's tens of thousands before the Korean War. So these guys, like the things that the American-aligned governments did, are endlessly inhumane. And the reasons as to why they did it was because they did not want, no matter what, they did not want any sort of USSR involvement, any sort of soft power initiatives that still are in place in the new Cold War that we're currently experiencing against China. Now, you can look at that situation and be like, well, look at the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, which is true. That is something worthy of much criticism, right? Oh, they're implementing a cultural genocide against the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. How dare you refuse to reckon with that reality? Okay? I do not hide that. I do not, act like that's not a real thing that's happening. I have talked about this many times over. Having said that, however, like, think about that within the context of what is also ongoing with our foreign allies, an extension of the United States of American empire, Israel, and what Israel is doing in Gaza. Okay? But Harrison said the Soviet Union was never scheming towards the Indian Ocean, adding Brzezinski promoted confrontation between Washington and Moscow in the Afghan arena. Brzezinski's hardline policy towards the Soviet Union was reflected in his policy towards Afghanistan. Over the 10 years, the CIA pumped some $2 billion of aid, weapons, and logistical support to the Mujahideen, who fervently believed they were fighting a jihad.